Sammy Davis had built a life most people could only dream of. He was a millionaire, a successful businessman who owned a chain of luxury hotels across the country. People admired him for his sharp mind, his drive, and the way he could turn any business into a profitable one. He had everything: money, power, respect. But there was something Sammy didn't have, something that couldn't be bought with wealth. He didn't have peace. Sammy's heart was heavy with bitterness, and it wasn't something he liked to talk about. There was a wall built around him, and no one had ever been able to get past it. He trusted no one, except for those who could help him make more money. His world was one of constant control, and he preferred it that way. Emotions. Weakness. Those things were for other people. Sammy had long since decided they were unnecessary. But there was one thing that Sammy disliked above all others. It wasn't business rivals or competitors, it wasn't even people who looked down on him. What Sammy couldn't stand, what he had grown to resent, were black women. This hatred wasn't something Sammy was born with, it was something he had learned from the environment he grew up in. His father, an old-fashioned and narrow-minded man, had filled his head with bitter thoughts about people who were different from him. And over time, those ideas had stuck. His father would often tell him, "Stay away from them, Sammy. They'll only bring trouble." Sammy didn't think about it much back then. But as he grew older, he began to believe it. The idea was simple in his mind: black women were trouble. He never took the time to question why or try to understand why he felt that way. He just accepted it as truth. In Sammy's world, there was always a clear line between us and them. And he had no intention of crossing that line. It was a Friday night, and Sammy was getting ready to attend one of the most prestigious charity galas in the city. The event was known for gathering the rich and powerful, a place where deals were made, faces were shown, and names were dropped. Sammy was no stranger to these types of gatherings. In fact, he often found himself at the center of attention, surrounded by people who wanted something from him, people who saw his wealth as the key to getting ahead. But tonight felt different. As he stood in front of the mirror adjusting his cufflinks, Sammy's thoughts were interrupted by the sharp sound of his phone buzzing on the marble countertop. He glanced at the screen, seeing the name of his assistant, Laura, flashing in bold letters. "Sammy, the gala is in full swing. The media is all over it, and they're expecting you to make an appearance. You'll need to be there in the next 15 minutes, she said quickly, her voice always steady and professional. "All right. I'll be there soon," he replied, his voice flat. Sammy wasn't particularly excited about attending the event. It was just another opportunity to rub elbows with people who only cared about the status he could provide. But he knew it was important for his business. After all, there were potential investors and partners in that room, people he needed to impress. So, without much thought, he grabbed his coat, checked his watch, and left the house. The gala was held at one of his own hotels, a beautiful building overlooking the city skyline. As Sammy walked through the grand entrance, the glittering lights and elegant decorations caught his attention. The place was buzzing with laughter and chatter, but it all felt so empty. People surrounded him, but none of them truly knew him. They only knew his name, his wealth, and what they could gain from him. Sammy stood near the bar, nursing a glass of champagne, scanning the crowd as if it were just another business meeting. He noticed the usual faces: city officials, wealthy businessmen, and socialites, most of whom were laughing too loudly and smiling too wide. Sammy had learned long ago to avoid small talk. It was a skill he had mastered over the years, and he used it to keep everyone at a distance. That's when he saw her. Standing across the room near the open doors, a woman caught his eye. She wasn't wearing the most expensive dress or the latest designer heels like most of the women here. In fact, her outfit was simple, but there was something about the way she stood that made her stand out in a room full of glittering jewels and sharp suits. She was quietly confident, as though she didn't need anyone's approval. Sammy couldn't put his finger on it, but something about her made him curious. Her name, he later learned, was Tasha. At first, he didn't give her much thought. She didn't seem like the kind of woman he usually interacted with, and that was fine by him. She was black, and from what Sammy had seen in his life, women like her never fit into his world. But as the night went on, he couldn't help but glance in her direction every now and then. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. In fact, she didn't even look interested in talking to the group of socialites she was standing with. Instead, she was observing, quietly watching the flow of the event with a calmness that almost seemed out of place. Something about her piqued Sammy's interest. It wasn't her appearance, though she was beautiful in a way that didn't scream for attention. It was the way she carried herself. The confidence she exuded, the calmness in her eyes. Sammy couldn't look away. But he quickly pushed the thought aside. She was just another woman at the event. Nothing special. Yet, in the back of his mind, Sammy couldn't help but wonder, who was she? He didn't like to admit it, but for the first time in a long time, something about the night felt different. And it wasn't just the champagne. Sammy spent the rest of the evening in his usual manner, conversing with familiar faces, making deals, and listening to conversations he wasn't really a part of. But through it all, his mind kept drifting back to the woman standing by the doors. Little did he know, this night would be the beginning of something he never expected. Something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the world and about himself. The evening had stretched on, and the gala was beginning to wind down. The music had slowed to a soft, jazzy tune, and the laughter in the air seemed more like a distant hum than the vibrant chatter it had been earlier. Sammy had already spoken to dozens of people, shaking hands, making small talk, and nodding politely at those who admired his success. But no matter how much he tried to focus on the conversation at hand, his thoughts kept drifting back to Tasha. She hadn't left his mind since he first noticed her. He couldn't explain why. It wasn't like he'd never seen an attractive woman before, or someone who stood out in a crowd. But there was something different about her. Tasha wasn't looking for attention. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, and that made her more interesting to Sammy than anyone else at the event. Most women at these kinds of galas were either trying too hard to fit in or waiting to be noticed. But Tasha wasn't like that. She didn't need to chase after attention, it came to her naturally, almost effortlessly. It was as if she didn't care about any of the people in the room, as if her presence was enough. And Sammy couldn't help but admire that. It was a little after midnight when Sammy found himself once again standing by the bar. He had just finished speaking with an investor, but his mind was elsewhere. His eyes searched the crowd, moving from person to person until they finally landed on Tasha once more. She stood near the large glass doors, her back slightly turned toward him. The soft glow of the chandeliers reflected in her dark eyes, and for the first time that night, Sammy saw her smile. It wasn't a big, flashy smile. It was small, quiet, even but genuine. Sammy felt a strange pull in his chest. He didn't want to admit it, but he was curious. He wanted to know more about her. Before he could think it through, Sammy found himself walking toward her, each step feeling more uncertain than the last. As he approached, he couldn't help but notice how different she was from everyone else at the gala. She wasn't leaning into conversations with the same intensity as the others. Instead, she was watching the city lights twinkle from the balcony, lost in her thoughts. "Mind if I join you?" Sammy asked, trying to sound casual. His voice was steady, but he couldn't hide the slight hesitation. Tasha turned to face him, her expression warm but not surprised. "Of course," she said with a nod, her voice soft but strong. "It's a nice view, isn't it?" Sammy looked out at the city. The lights seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon, and for a moment, he felt as if he were looking at something bigger than himself. "Yeah. "It's beautiful," he said, but he didn't really mean the view. It was Tasha's presence that felt so different. They stood there for a moment, not saying much, just taking in the night. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was easy. Tasha seemed at peace, and for the first time in a long time, Sammy felt a little more relaxed. "I don't think we've met properly," Sammy said after a beat, his voice breaking the silence. He extended his hand. "I'm Sammy." Tasha smiled again, a little wider this time. She shook his hand with a firm, confident grip. "Tasha." "Nice to meet you, Tasha," Sammy said, feeling an odd sense of calm wash over him. "So, what brings you to an event like this?" Tasha shrugged slightly, her eyes still on the view. "I'm just here for the cause," she said simply. "I work with a few organizations that focus on community outreach and social justice. It's important to me." Sammy raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You don't seem like the type to be interested in all this," he motioned around the ballroom. "The glamour, the luxury, the fake smiles." Tasha laughed softly. "I guess that's true," she said with a gentle smile. "But, you know, change can come from anywhere. Even here." Sammy studied her for a moment. There was something about her that was so different. He'd never met anyone like Tasha. Most people at these events were all about appearances. They only cared about what others thought of them. But Tasha wasn't like that. She didn't need approval, and she didn't try to impress anyone. "Do you think you can really make a difference in a place like this?" Sammy asked, genuinely curious. Tasha turned to him, her expression softening. "Why not?" she said simply. "It's easy to say things will never change, to think that the world is too broken. But if everyone just keeps saying that, then nothing will ever get better. Change starts with people like us. And change doesn't always look the way we expect." Sammy felt his chest tighten slightly. Her words hit him harder than he expected. Change. That was a concept Sammy had never really given much thought. He'd always focused on his businesses, his career, his wealth. Change wasn't something he had time for. He had a schedule to keep, deals to close, goals to reach. The world didn't change because people talked about it. People needed to take action. But here was Tasha, standing before him, a woman who seemed to believe in something bigger than herself. She wasn't trying to get him to agree with her, wasn't trying to persuade him with a lecture. She was just speaking her truth. For the first time in years, Sammy felt uncomfortable in his own skin. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the way Tasha spoke, so calmly, so sure of herself. Or maybe it was the fact that he found himself genuinely interested in what she had to say. Either way, he didn't like the feeling. "So, what do you think of all this?" Tasha asked, glancing back at the ballroom. "Is it just a bunch of rich people pretending they care?" Sammy thought for a moment, staring into his glass. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It kind of feels that way sometimes." Tasha nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes, it's the people with the most power who need to do the most work. But that doesn't mean we can't try." Sammy didn't know what to say to that. It wasn't something he could easily dismiss, and for once, he didn't want to. This conversation marked the beginning of something Sammy hadn't expected. He had come to the gala expecting a simple night of business, but now, standing with Tasha on the balcony, he felt like something much deeper was stirring inside him. Maybe this night, and this woman, would change the way he saw the world. And maybe, just maybe, Sammy was starting to see the world a little differently. The following days after the gala were filled with the usual hustle and bustle for Sammy. He attended meetings, signed deals, and checked off the never-ending tasks on his to-do list. His life was moving at the usual pace, fast and focused. But one thing had changed. He couldn't stop thinking about Tasha. She had lingered in his mind, not in the way a fleeting attraction might, but with a quiet persistence that Sammy couldn't ignore. There was something about her that felt real, something different from the usual crowd he spent his time with. Sammy found himself thinking about their conversation, her calm confidence, the way she spoke so easily about things he'd never thought about before. He didn't know why, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a curiosity he couldn't explain. He hadn't seen her since that night at the gala, but the image of her standing there, so calm and composed, kept replaying in his mind. He even found himself checking his calendar, wondering when he would have the chance to cross paths with her again. He told himself it was just curiosity, nothing more. He didn't have time for distractions. But even as he tried to shake off the thoughts, they kept returning, pulling at him. A week later, Sammy was attending another event, this time, a business conference for tech investors. As expected, the ballroom was filled with high-powered individuals, all eager to talk about their next big idea. Sammy was moving through the crowd with ease, shaking hands and discussing the future of his latest hotel projects. But in the back of his mind, he kept wondering if Tasha would show up. It wasn't long before he spotted her again. She was standing at the edge of the crowd, talking to a few people, her posture as relaxed as ever. Her presence was like a quiet force that seemed to draw his attention even in a room full of important people. She was talking about something with passion, her voice animated as she gestured with her hands. Sammy felt a sudden urge to approach her, but he hesitated, unsure of how to start the conversation. "Sammy, over here," a voice called, interrupting his thoughts. It was one of his business partners, Greg. Sammy quickly turned to face him, masking the moment of distraction. The two exchanged pleasantries, and Sammy tried to focus on the conversation. But his eyes kept darting back to Tasha, watching her with a curiosity that felt uncomfortable. After a few minutes, Greg noticed where Sammy was looking. "You seem distracted, my friend," Greg said with a grin. "Is something on your mind?" Sammy chuckled, trying to hide his sudden unease. "Nah, just keeping an eye on the crowd," he replied, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. He couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to talk to Tasha again, but something held him back. Greg raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Sammy let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He needed to get his thoughts together, but the pull to go talk to Tasha was growing stronger. It was as if she had unknowingly become a puzzle he couldn't stop trying to solve. After what seemed like an eternity, Sammy finally made up his mind. He excused himself from Greg, who gave him a curious look but said nothing, and made his way toward Tasha. This time, he didn't hesitate. He had no plan, no script in mind. All he knew was that he needed to speak to her again. When he reached her, Tasha looked up, her eyes brightening as she recognized him. "Sammy," she said, smiling warmly. "It's good to see you again." Sammy nodded, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "Good to see you, too." There was a brief pause, neither of them sure what to say next. Finally, Sammy broke the silence. "I've been thinking about our conversation the other night," he said. "About what you said about change." Tasha's eyes softened, and she stepped aside slightly, offering him a space next to her by the window. "I'm glad to hear that," she said gently. "What about it? Something on your mind?" Sammy hesitated for a moment. The words didn't come easily, but he knew he had to ask. "I guess. I'm just trying to understand. I mean, you really believe that we can make a difference in places like this?" He motioned to the grand ballroom full of rich businessmen, all laughing and talking about their latest projects. Tasha looked out at the crowd, her eyes thoughtful. "Of course. Why not?" she said with a quiet confidence. "People often look at events like this and think they're all about the money, the power, the status. And they're not wrong, there's a lot of that. But that doesn't mean it's all for nothing. She turned to face him, her expression earnest. I believe in using the opportunities we have to make a positive change. It might seem small at first, but every action counts. You don't have to change the world overnight. You just need to start with one thing. One conversation. One decision. Sammy watched her closely. He had heard similar things before, of course people talked about making a difference all the time. But the way Tasha said it, with such certainty and passion, made him feel like she truly believed in it. Sammy found himself lost in thought. She wasn't just talking about the surface level of life. She was talking about something deeper, something that involved more than just money and success. For a moment, Sammy realized that maybe he had been so focused on his own success that he had forgotten what truly mattered. I guess I've always been about the bottom line, Sammy admitted, his voice quieter now. But maybe there's more to life than just making money. Tasha's smile was gentle, but there was a spark in her eyes. There's a lot more, she said softly. And it starts with people being real with each other. Honest. Sammy nodded slowly, feeling a weight lift from his chest. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he could talk to someone without the need for a mask. The walls he had built around himself seemed to be slowly crumbling. They stood there for a few moments, just looking out at the city. Sammy felt something shift inside him. It was subtle, but it was there. A feeling he hadn't known in a long time. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone in this world. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't need to carry the weight of it all by himself. As the evening continued, Sammy and Tasha talked more. Not about business, not about success, but about life. About what it meant to truly make a difference, to leave a legacy beyond wealth. For the first time in a long time, Sammy didn't feel like he had all the answers. And for the first time in a long time, that felt okay. Little did Sammy know, this was the beginning of a journey that would change everything he thought he knew about himself and about love. Over the next few weeks, Sammy found himself thinking about Tasha more than he cared to admit. Each time he attended an event, each time he sat in a meeting or took another call, her words echoed in his mind. The way she spoke about change, the way she viewed the world so different from the way he had always seen it. He was a man who thrived on control, on certainty. He had built his wealth, his success, by sticking to a plan, by knowing exactly what to expect. But Tasha had made him realize something: plans and predictability didn't always matter. Sometimes, the unexpected was what shaped a person the most. Despite his curiosity, Sammy kept his distance at first. He told himself that he couldn't afford to be distracted. His businesses were growing, his reputation was solidifying, and everything seemed to be falling into place. But every time he saw Tasha at one of the charity events, or in passing, he felt that same pull, that quiet invitation to open up. It wasn't long before Tasha reached out to him. A simple message popped up on his phone one afternoon: "Sammy, I have an event next week that I'd love for you to attend. It's a small gathering for a cause I care about. If you're free, I think you'd enjoy it." At first, Sammy hesitated. He had his own things to do, things that seemed more important at the time. But he couldn't shake the thought of seeing her again. He was curious, yes, but there was more to it now. He was starting to feel something, a connection that went beyond just business talk or passing pleasantries. He replied, "I'll be there. Send me the details." The day of the event came quickly. Sammy had cleared his schedule, something he rarely did, just to make time for it. As he drove to the venue, a small community center on the outskirts of the city, he couldn't help but feel a little out of place. The event wasn't glamorous. There were no fancy suits or expensive cocktails. The room was filled with people who didn't care about status or money, people who were focused on giving back. Sammy walked into the venue, scanning the room. It was a sharp contrast to the usual high-profile events he attended, but there was something peaceful about it. People were gathered in small groups, talking about projects, sharing ideas, and discussing ways they could make a difference in their community. Sammy's eyes landed on Tasha, and she was talking to a group of volunteers, her face lighting up as she spoke passionately about the work they were doing. As soon as she noticed him, her smile widened. "Sammy," she called, walking over to greet him. He smiled back, although it was softer than usual. "Hey, Tasha. This place is different." She chuckled. "I know, right? It's not like the galas you're used to, but that's kind of the point." Sammy raised an eyebrow. "You think I'm only used to those kinds of events?" "No," she said, her voice light but sincere. "But I think you're used to events where everything is about appearance, about what people can get from each other. Here, people show up for something real. They want to give, not just take." Her words made him pause. For a moment, he felt like an outsider, like he was surrounded by something he didn't fully understand. But at the same time, he felt a strange pull, a desire to see things from a different perspective. "Let's get you something to drink," Tasha said, leading him to a table where a few volunteers were serving coffee and snacks. Sammy didn't normally drink coffee, he was more of a tea person, but he followed her, intrigued by her passion and the way she carried herself. They sat down at a small table in the corner, and for the first time, Sammy wasn't concerned with business or what was happening around him. All he cared about was this conversation, the way Tasha spoke so freely about her work and her vision for the future. It was a side of her he hadn't seen before, and it fascinated him. "So, what made you get involved in all this?" Sammy asked, his voice genuine. "I mean, you seem to have a good life. A lot of people would just enjoy their success, but you're out here doing this." Tasha smiled, a soft, reflective expression on her face. "I don't think it's about enjoying success for me. It's about using what I have to help others. I've been blessed in many ways, but I didn't get here alone. There were people who helped me, who supported me. I think the least I can do is give back." Sammy's eyes softened as he listened to her. He had never really thought about success that way. In his world, success was about winning, about always being ahead of everyone else. But Tasha was different. She didn't see success as a competition. For her, it was about making the world a better place, using what she had to lift others up. "I get it," Sammy said, nodding slowly. "But how do you deal with the frustration? The setbacks? Sometimes it feels like no matter what you do, the world just doesn't change." Tasha didn't seem fazed by his question. She leaned forward, her voice soft but sure. "Change doesn't happen overnight. But every small effort adds up. Every person you inspire, every small action you take, it all matters. And even if it doesn't always feel like it, you're making a difference." Sammy sat back in his chair, her words settling over him like a quiet wave. There was so much he hadn't considered. He had spent so much time thinking about the big picture, about growing his wealth and his businesses, that he had never really thought about what it all meant in the grand scheme of things. What was success if it didn't contribute to something greater than himself? For the first time, Sammy began to wonder if he had been living with the wrong priorities. The event continued around them, but Sammy felt like he was in a different world. Tasha had opened his eyes to a new way of thinking. And as they continued to talk, the connection between them grew stronger, deeper. By the end of the evening, Sammy didn't want to leave. He had never felt so comfortable in a place like this, with people who cared about things that didn't revolve around money or status. Tasha had shown him a side of life that he had never truly known, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace. As they stood to leave, Tasha turned to him. "Thank you for coming, Sammy. I really appreciate it." Sammy smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. I'm glad I came. I've learned more than I thought I would. And for once, Sammy didn't feel the need to rush back to his world of luxury and business. He felt like he had just taken a step towards something more meaningful, something real. The weeks after that small community event passed in a blur. Sammy's life returned to its usual pace, with meetings, deals, and business dinners filling up his schedule. But there was a difference now. His mind wasn't completely consumed by his work. Every now and then, he found his thoughts drifting to Tasha, the way she had spoken about her purpose, the passion she carried in her voice, and the way she seemed to see the world through a lens of possibilities, not limitations. It was strange, Sammy thought. He had always been focused on growth, expanding his businesses, investing in profitable ventures, securing his legacy. Yet, every time he saw Tasha, something inside him stirred. She made him question the very foundations of his life, the things he had considered important, the things that had defined his success for so long. Tasha's words echoed in his mind constantly. Success isn't just about what you have, Sammy. It's about what you give. He didn't know it then, but those words had already begun to change him. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Sammy received a message from Tasha. She invited him to another event, a fundraiser for a local children's hospital. He had attended dozens of charity events before, but something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the way Tasha had described it, or maybe it was because, after all this time, he couldn't ignore the feeling that he wanted to see her again. He hesitated for a moment. He had a lot on his plate, projects to oversee, meetings to attend. But then, almost as if something inside him had made the decision for him, he replied, "I'll be there. Thanks for the invite." That evening, Sammy arrived at the venue, a modest hall filled with soft lighting, laughter, and the warmth of people coming together for a good cause. It was nothing like the flashy, high-end galas he was used to, but there was something special about it. The air was filled with a sense of community, a shared purpose that Sammy couldn't quite put into words. As he stepped inside, his eyes searched the room, quickly finding Tasha at the front of the hall, speaking to a small group of volunteers. She looked calm, focused, but there was an energy around her that drew people in. She noticed him right away. Her face lit up with a genuine smile, and before Sammy knew it, she was walking toward him. "Sammy, I'm so glad you made it," Tasha said, her voice warm, her eyes bright with excitement. "I wasn't sure you'd come, but I'm happy you did." Sammy returned her smile, feeling a little lighter than he had in days. "I wouldn't have missed it," he replied, surprised at how sincere his words sounded. They exchanged pleasantries before Tasha led him to a table filled with pamphlets about the hospital, volunteer opportunities, and information on how to donate. Sammy found himself listening intently as Tasha spoke about the children's hospital and the impact they had on the local community. "This is something close to my heart," Tasha said, her voice softening. "I've been working with them for a few years now. They do such amazing work for children who are battling illness. They don't just provide medical care, they provide hope." Sammy listened carefully. For the first time in a long time, he realized that he hadn't been paying attention to things that truly mattered. He had been so caught up in building his empire, expanding his wealth, that he had lost sight of what was important: people, lives, and real change. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the last time we talked," Sammy confessed, looking down at the table for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "About success. I've spent so many years chasing the wrong things." Tasha looked at him with kindness in her eyes. "It's never too late to change your perspective," she said softly. "What matters most is what we do with what we have. The rest is just details." Sammy nodded, his mind racing. He had everything anyone could dream of: wealth, status, success, but he had never felt more empty. There was always a sense that something was missing, but he had never known what. Tasha had helped him see it. It wasn't about the money, the high-rise buildings, or the luxury cars. It was about how he could make a difference. How he could give back in a meaningful way. "You're right," Sammy said, his voice quieter now. "I've been so focused on the bottom line that I didn't realize how much more there is to life." Tasha smiled, her expression warm but gentle. "It's okay. Most of us get caught up in the same things. But the real success is in the difference we make in the lives of others." The conversation flowed naturally from there, each word drawing Sammy in deeper. He realized just how much he admired Tasha's heart, her unwavering belief that small acts of kindness and generosity could change the world. It was something he had never fully understood until now. The more they talked, the more Sammy found himself drawn to her, not just for her compassion, but for the way she had opened his eyes to a side of life he had ignored for too long. As the evening went on, Sammy didn't feel the usual urge to rush off. He didn't want to leave. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The conversations were genuine, the people were kind, and the cause was something he could truly get behind. When the event finally came to an end, Tasha turned to him with a smile. "Thank you for coming tonight, Sammy. It means a lot." Sammy smiled back, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "Thank you for inviting me. I've learned more tonight than I have in years." As they stood near the door, preparing to leave, Sammy felt a shift within him. There was a quiet excitement in the air, something he hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time in ages, he was beginning to realize that there was more to life than what he had known. Tasha had opened a door inside of him, a door he never knew existed. And he had a feeling that once he walked through it, his life would never be the same again. The days after the Children's Hospital fundraiser were filled with an unusual sense of clarity for Sammy. For years, he had been chasing after more wealth, more recognition, more success, but the truth was, he had never felt fulfilled. Tasha had shown him something he hadn't realized he was missing, a deeper purpose. At first, he had been hesitant to dive into something that was so far from his usual world. But every conversation with Tasha made him feel more certain that he was moving in the right direction. He found himself thinking less about his next business move and more about how he could use his resources for good. How could he make a difference, not just for himself, but for others? It wasn't easy. His old habits, his old way of thinking, still lingered in the back of his mind. He'd catch himself thinking about profits, numbers, and the next big deal. But when he thought of Tasha, when he thought of the people he had met at the last event, those thoughts began to fade. It was a Friday afternoon when Sammy found himself walking through the doors of another event, this time for a local shelter that helped homeless families get back on their feet. Sammy had been hesitant about this one. It wasn't a glamorous gathering. It didn't promise the networking opportunities or the luxury of the high-end events he was used to. But this time, he didn't care. Tasha had invited him, and that was reason enough. He had been to countless galas and business dinners, but there was something different about this event. The people here weren't just talking about business deals or their next vacation. They were talking about real issues, about the families struggling to make ends meet, about the children who had nowhere to go, about how they could help. As Sammy walked into the room, he felt a sudden shift inside of him. It was strange, but the usual nervousness or discomfort he felt at these types of events wasn't there. He didn't feel like he had to prove anything. He didn't have to wear the mask of the successful businessman, the one who always had everything under control. Here, he could just be himself. And that felt like freedom. Tasha spotted him almost immediately. She was speaking to a group of volunteers, but when she saw Sammy, her face lit up. She excused herself and made her way over to him. "I'm so glad you came," she said with a smile, her voice warm and genuine. "I know this one is a bit different from the others." Sammy smiled back, feeling at ease for the first time in a while. "It's good to be here," he said simply. Tasha nodded. "You'll see. These people, they're incredible. They don't have much, but they give everything they can." They spent the evening walking around the venue, talking to people, learning about the different programs the shelter had in place. Sammy was amazed by how dedicated the volunteers were, how much love and effort went into helping the families. There was no talk of profits, no mention of prestige, just people trying to make a real difference in the lives of others. For Sammy, it was eye-opening. The simplicity of the work, the authenticity of the people, made him realize just how much he had taken for granted in his own life. He had spent years accumulating things that didn't matter, while there were people who had so little, yet were still giving so much. By the end of the evening, Sammy felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. Tasha had opened his eyes to a world he had never fully seen before. He had always admired success, but now he was starting to admire something else: selflessness, generosity, and the ability to make a difference without needing recognition for it. As the event came to a close, Sammy found himself standing by the door, watching the volunteers clean up after a long night. Tasha was chatting with a few people, but Sammy couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of admiration for her. She was so different from the people he was used to. So different from himself. She noticed him standing there, lost in thought, and walked over. "I know you're probably wondering how all of this works," she said, breaking the silence. Sammy turned to face her, a small smile on his lips. "It's not so much that I'm wondering. It's more that I'm learning. I think I've been blind to a lot of things in my life. Things that really matter." Tasha studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "You're not the only one," she said gently. "A lot of people spend their whole lives chasing after the wrong things. It's easy to get caught up in the noise. But I believe it's never too late to change." Sammy took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was speaking from the heart. "I don't want to just keep building for myself anymore. I want to build something that actually matters. I want to make a difference." Tasha's smile softened. "You're already on the right path, Sammy. It's not about the big, flashy gestures. It's about the small things. The actions that come from the heart." Sammy nodded slowly, his thoughts racing. He had spent years thinking that success meant building an empire, expanding his businesses, and being seen as someone who had it all. But now, he was starting to realize that the real success came from helping others. The joy of seeing someone's life changed because of something you did, that was what truly mattered. For the first time, Sammy wasn't thinking about his next deal, his next big project. He was thinking about what he could do with the wealth and influence he had, how he could use it to help others. As the evening wound down, Sammy felt a shift within himself. He wasn't sure exactly what it was, but he knew one thing for sure: he was ready for something different. Ready for something real. When Tasha said goodbye that night, Sammy gave her a sincere smile. "Thanks for showing me all of this," he said. "I think I'm starting to understand what it really means to make a difference." Tasha smiled, her eyes sparkling with quiet satisfaction. "You're welcome, Sammy. I know you're going to do great things." As Sammy walked out into the cool night air, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, he could be a part of something greater than himself. Something that would leave a real mark on the world. And with Tasha by his side, he felt ready to take that first step toward a new chapter in his life. The months that followed were a whirlwind of change for Sammy. He had found himself stepping further and further away from the life he once knew: the endless meetings, the constant race for more success, and the world of status that had defined him for so long. Instead, he was now focused on something entirely different, something more meaningful. Tasha had become an integral part of his life, not just as a friend, but as someone who had helped him see beyond his own narrow view of the world. She had opened his eyes to the simple truth that success was not about what you could gather for yourself, but about what you could give to others. Sammy had spent his life surrounded by wealth, but now he was surrounded by purpose. And it was a feeling he hadn't realized he was missing. One morning, as he sat in his office, Sammy felt a sense of calm that had eluded him for years. He had just signed a major deal for one of his companies, but today, it didn't feel as important as it once would have. He wasn't concerned about the money it would bring or the praise he would receive. Instead, his thoughts were consumed by something else: the charity projects he had begun to work on. Tasha had introduced him to a number of organizations, and Sammy had jumped in with both feet. He had started to take an active role in several of them, supporting homeless shelters, providing scholarships for underprivileged children, and even launching an initiative to help small businesses in struggling neighborhoods. He was no longer interested in building a legacy based on material wealth. His new goal was simple: to leave behind a legacy of kindness, of real change, and of people's lives transformed by his actions. That afternoon, Sammy met Tasha for lunch at a small cafe, a place far away from the usual high-end restaurants he would frequent. It had a cozy atmosphere, with mismatched chairs and wooden tables. The kind of place where people didn't care about how much you earned or what you wore, they only cared about the food and the conversation. "Hey, you," Tasha greeted him as he arrived, flashing a smile that always made Sammy's heart feel lighter. "Hey," he said, returning her smile. He took a seat across from her. "How's everything going?" Tasha leaned back in her chair, her eyes shining with excitement. "It's going great. The shelter's been doing better than I expected. We've had more donations, more volunteers. It's amazing how people really do want to help when they see others in need." Sammy nodded. He had seen it firsthand in the last few months. The more he gave, the more he received, not in material things, but in the satisfaction of knowing he was doing something meaningful. "I've been thinking about what you said," Sammy continued, his voice thoughtful. "About leaving a legacy. I think I was always focused on the wrong kind of legacy, one built on power and wealth. But I want something different now. I want to leave behind a mark of change, of giving." Tasha's smile softened. "You already are, Sammy. You're doing amazing work. You've got the power to change lives, and you're using it for something good. Not everyone can say that." Sammy felt a warmth spread through him. Tasha had always believed in him, even when he didn't fully believe in himself. She had shown him that there was more to life than chasing after riches and fame. There was purpose, there was impact, and there was love. "I want to do more," Sammy said, his voice firm with determination. "I want to create a foundation. Something that helps people on a large scale. I've got the resources, and now I've got the drive. It's time to make it official." Tasha's eyes widened, and she leaned forward. "That's incredible. Sammy, I knew you were going to do something big, but this is amazing." Sammy smiled, feeling more certain than ever about his new path. "I don't want to just write checks. I want to get involved. I want to understand the people I'm helping. I want to see the change firsthand." Tasha nodded. "That's the heart of it. It's about connection, not just charity. You're doing this for the people, not for recognition." As they continued to talk, Sammy felt a sense of peace he had never known before. He was no longer a man driven by numbers and profit margins. He was a man driven by a desire to make the world a better place. A few weeks later, Sammy officially launched his foundation, one focused on community empowerment and education. He worked tirelessly alongside Tasha and her network of volunteers, bringing his ideas to life and using his business skills to streamline operations. He was no longer just a businessman, he was now a philanthropist, and it felt more fulfilling than any deal he had ever made. The work wasn't easy. there were setbacks, challenges, and moments of doubt. But with Tasha by his side, Sammy felt equipped to handle whatever came their way. They became a team partners not just in business, but in life. Over time, Sammy's perspective on success continued to evolve. He saw the direct impact of his work: the children who now had the chance to go to school, the families who had new opportunities for stable housing, and the small businesses that were given the resources to grow. It wasn't just about giving away money, it was about creating opportunities for people to change their own lives. One evening, after a long day of meetings and planning, Sammy sat at his desk, reflecting on how far he had come. He looked at the photos on the walls of his office, pictures from his childhood, his family, and now, new photos of the people whose lives had been touched by his foundation. It was a quiet moment, but a powerful one. He didn't need to be the wealthiest man in the room anymore. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He had found something far more valuable than money or status: purpose. Sammy had finally discovered that true success wasn't measured by what you had, but by what you gave. And with Tasha by his side, he knew he had found the greatest gift of all: a life filled with love, impact, and the kind of success that truly mattered.